Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We also have a guest host with us today, Bruce Muzik from loveatfirstfight.com. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, so cool to be here again.
Great to have you. Bruce has been on the podcast before as our guest, and we've wanted to bring him on again to talk about what we're going to be sharing with you today.
Yeah, so Bruce, you are an expert in all things relationship. And the last time that you were on our podcast, we talked about attachment styles and attachment theory, which is your area of expertise. But we also talked about the phases of a relationship. And we were having a conversation because we're right now working on a project together. And we were having a conversation about those three phases of a relationship and what it actually looks like to navigate through them to get to the final desirable third part. So would you be willing to sort of remind us what those three phases are, and then we can maybe flay out a little bit more of what each of those stages looks like?
Sure. So I think it's important that everybody understands the phases that relationships go through, just like we all understand that we grow up, we come into this world as toddlers, and then eventually we become teenagers, and eventually we hopefully die as wise old men and wise old women. And nobody gets upset when kind of teenagers act like teenagers. We just go, oh, well, they're in the teenage phase. That's what teenagers do. Or, oh, they're in the terrible twos. That's what terrible twos do. And I think for the same reason, it's important to understand that your relationship is going to go through developmental phases. And depending on which researcher you look at, you'll find anywhere between 3, 4, 5, or 6 different stages. I just use a very simple model that helps get the point across. And it's the 3-stage model. And the first stage is the romance stage. It's that one we all know and love when you're falling head over heels in love with each other. And you're literally high on drugs in this stage because your brain is pumping out oxytocin, which is known as the cuddle hormone. It's that hormone that makes you feel like you're in love. Serotonin, vasopressin, a whole bunch of yummy goodies that make you see your partner through these rose-tinted glasses, and you only see their good side. You only show them your good side too. And you guys are basically in the most immature form of love. And this can last anywhere between 2 months and 2 years, and then bam, one day you wake up next to the single most incompatible person on the entire planet, your partner that you've chosen, arriving in the power struggle stage, which is the second developmental stage. And it's kind of like your relationship's teenage years. And if the function of the romance stage was to pull the two of you together and get you to commit, then and kind of become a unit, like a team, bond together, then the function of the power struggle stage is to get you to separate a little so you don't lose yourself. So you learn to retain your autonomy and your independence as well as have your relationship. And it's a difficult time. It's characterized by tons of conflict, uncertainty, anxiety, issues of trust, issues of dependability, issues of commitment. And if you're lucky, you make it to the other side of the power struggle stage. Most couples, I believe, don't. They either stay stuck in the power struggle stage and live these relationships of desperation, never fully expressing themselves, never fully feeling known, never fully feeling like they can count on their partner to have their back, never fully being able to relax and discover intimacy. But if you're lucky, you make it through to the mature love stage. And in the mature love stage, conflict no longer kind of is dominating your conversations. You're no longer trying to change your partner and get your needs met. You've accepted that your partner is flawed, and you've also accepted that you're flawed. And the two of you have learned how to navigate each other's flaws, meet each other's needs, and your attention can turn to more exciting opportunities like, what are we going to do now that we have a stable relationship? Now that we're not, living on anxiety and fear and conflict every day, and we're actually relaxed in each other's presence, we've resolved our conflict, we feel known and understood, we're intimately connected. Well, our relationship's got to serve some kind of bigger purpose. And one of the characteristics of couples in the mature love stage is they often collaborate to create something that serves as a gift to the world. And I think one of my favorite examples of a couple that's doing this is Antonia Dodge and Joel Mark Witt. You guys have taken your love for each other and given birth to something way beyond what either of you were probably capable of individually, personality hacker. And, now you've had over 10 million downloads and you've influenced, tens of thousands of people's lives. It's amazing. And I think you guys are a great example of what the mature love stage actually looks like. So that's a quick overview of mature love, power struggle, and romance. And I just want to say that the romance stage is the most immature form of love. And most people, Hollywood, I think, promotes the idea that the romance stage is love, that's what we've got to be going for. No, I think personality hacker is what we've got to be going for. You guys, that's mature love.
Thank you for saying all that. It's very nice and kind of you.
Yeah, you've got 45 minutes to cut that out.
Yeah. Thanks, Bruce. So I heard this thing recently. Somebody said there's a really big difference between the pursuit and the partnership. And the person was talking about how people are addicted to the pursuit, like the pursuit of something. Those chemicals, that romance stage you talk about, it does seem like our culture makes that the focal point of everything for most people. And you said it's the most immature. It can also be the most fun, though. I guess maybe there's like an addictive quality to it. I mean, if you're pumped full of these drugs and chemicals, it's probably hard to not be hooked on that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can get hooked on it because it feels so good. But the problem is it never goes deep and you never feel truly safe. And I would assert for a lot of people who are insecurely attached, it is not love that's driving the pursuit, Joel. It's fear. It's low-level anxiety that I need to win this person and I need to get them to commit so that I feel safe and I can finally relax. And often, especially if we grew up in families of origin where our parents didn't do the world's greatest job in parenting us, we will have learnt that love equals anxiety in some way, shape, or form. So if you grew up in a family where, for example, your dad was never fully present and he was an alcoholic and maybe he beat you from time to time, your brain gets wired to associate your first loving experiences of bonding with a primary attachment figure like your dad or your mom, also gets wired to associate them with fear. And you grow up into an adult whose definition of love is, I know I'm in love when my heart's pounding at 1,000,000 miles an hour, pound, 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 pound. But that pounding at 1,000,000 miles an hour, the excitement of being with this new person, often isn't love or excitement at all. It's fear, it's anxiety, it's uncertainty. And I think, from my experience of speaking with thousands of couples now, that choosing a partner based on your heart pounding is a really bad set of criteria. I think it doesn't often bode well for a great partnership that matures into the mature love stage.
Well, and I would imagine that when you are addicted to the chemical experience of early love, I mean, it's just not sustainable. You said it lasts between 2 months and 2 years. And so once the chemical high goes, then you've got to go find a new hit, which means a new partner, right? I mean, it's like, is it possible to keep that chemical new love, falling in love high going with the same person?
I don't think so. Not in the same way as the mature love stage, because newness always fades as you get to know each other. I mean, you look at Joel right now, Antonia, and your heart doesn't skip a beat anymore in the same way it did when maybe you first met him.
You haven't seen him in his
every inch of his body,
You haven't seen him in his tidy whities.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to make any assumptions here at all. That wasn't meant to be a judgment on your marriage, but I mean, by all accounts, my wife is pretty hot. But I look at her and I think, God, you're beautiful. But my heart doesn't skip the same beat as the first week I met her. I was like, I have to have her. Right. I have to bed her and I have to have her stay the night. Now, how am I going to get her to commit? It was just like this constant, pursuit, as Joel says.
Right. Yeah. Within the first night, you're like, how do I get her to commit? Well, I was going to say, though, because that chemical phase doesn't last long, if you get addicted to it, that by definition means that you can't be in any single stable relationship. But I guess my question would be, is there value to extending it for longer? I mean, like, is this sort of like the, like the sort of the initial fuel in the tank that helps get you through the next phase of the power struggle? Do you want to keep the honeymoon phase going as long as possible? Because that's part of how you like remember why you're with this person when you're at each other's throats, I would imagine.
I don't even think I need to answer that because I think you just stated it so beautifully. That's exactly it. I often talk with clients who bemoan how short their romance stage was, and they wish it was longer. And couples who had a longer romance stage tend to have greater memories to draw from when tough times arrive, to remember back how good things were. When you dive straight into the power struggle stage, like within 2 weeks, it's difficult, because then you start to question, well, why am I in this relationship if only 2 weeks in we're already in conflict? But here's an interesting thing to note about the power struggle stage, is that according to research, it begins usually once one or both partners perceive some kind of permanence to the relationship. So usually once there's some kind of commitment that happens. I have a friend, and in my kind of language, she's a hailstorm. She's anxiously attached, meaning she's afraid of abandonment. And she met another guy who's also anxiously attached, who's afraid of abandonment. So now we had these two anxiously attached people, and they met at a party, and they fell in love at the party. 2 weeks later, they were engaged to be married. 3 months later, they were married. In 3 months, the minute they got married, their power struggle hit like a hurricane, like a tropical storm, because they had achieved some kind of permanence in their relationship, and their romance stage was so short that they started to question what they were doing together. I don't want to say unfortunately, but within 2 weeks of being married, she was already discovered she was pregnant. They had an enormously long power struggle stage that was incredibly difficult. And I think you're right, Antonia. I think it behooves to see if you can extend the romance stage and enjoy the romance for as long as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, that as soon as you experience a feeling of permanence,
yeah,
that's when the power struggle starts. And so, is there much more to be said about that first stage, the romance or the honeymoon, other than just it's a time period where you're high and it feels really awesome, and it's probably going to end as soon as you realize you want to be with this person?
I have an incongruity to ask about. I thought at one point, Bruce, it sounded like you were talking about if you are super attracted to this, like if your heart's skipping beats and there's all this drug pumping into your brain and body, you're feeling this way, that's probably not going to be sustainable. On the other hand, we say, if you can keep that blood pumping and all that excitement going as long as possible, that's what creates sustainability.
We're saying that if your heart's pumping at 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time, fear is probably driving your choice in partner, and that's probably not sustainable. Also, if your heart's pumping 1,000,000 miles an hour and it's not fear, it truly is excitement, that will eventually wear off naturally. But extending the romance stage just means enjoying the good times before conflict begins, because inevitably conflict will begin, and that is a natural part of development. The power struggle has to happen. You can't get around it and arrive in the mature love stage without moving through conflict. That doesn't mean the conflict has to destroy you or has to be hurtful all the time. But if you're insecurely attached, and listen to our other podcast on attachment to if you're interested in finding out what that's all about, if you struggle to trust romantic partners, or to struggle to feel safe in relationship, or struggle to lean on others and have others lean on you, then what's likely to happen is that when your power struggle does hit, it's going to be filled with conflict. And what you want to know about that is that that's normal, and you need to move through it, not run from it. I think that's probably the most powerful thing I might say on this entire podcast. But
no, absolutely. I mean, conflict is how you get to true harmony, right? It's how things work in our human dynamics, through conflict. So if a person is single listening right now, it sounds like one of the best things, like from my experience, one of the best things a person could work on is conflict resolution. Because you're preparing yourself to be ready for when you're in a partnership someday, after all those chemicals wear off, the conflict starts to happen. And if you've built some skill in conflict, the ability to navigate through conflict as a person, your likelihood of having a successful run at this whole power struggle stage is probably higher, right?
I would think so, yes. I mean, you can't go wrong with learning conflict resolution skills. And at the same time, I also think that when we get into conflict and we are triggered, a lot of our skills go out the window because our amygdala takes over, our prefrontal cortex shuts down, so our thinking brain kind of shuts down, and we go straight into survival mode, and we'll tend to do, the same thing we did when we were 18 months old, and maybe a slightly more sophisticated version of it, which is like make a noise or try and please our partner or shut down and numb ourselves. And often that's an unconscious process until it's made conscious. And I think the easiest way to make it conscious is actually to work on it in relationship, because very often these triggers don't get triggered when you're single. So you can kind of do as much navel gazing. You can navel gaze till you're blue in the face, and you won't be able to transform your reactions to conflict or to being triggered until you're actually in the moment with a partner. And so while definitely having the skills will help, I think you also then need to practice with a partner when you're triggered. And that's a lot of the work that I do with my couples at Love at First Fight.
Yeah, that actually resonates a lot with me. Because I had a lot
I was curious about you guys. Like, how was your power struggle stage? Did you guys have conflict resolution skills? What was your experience of the romance stage? Because you guys are a couple that's made it to the mature love stage. I think you'd be great role models to talk about it.
We certainly do have conflict. And one of the reasons I think I was best able to navigate conflict in my current marriage is because of my first marriage. I actually went in with some arrogance. To basically speak to what you're saying, I thought, well, as a single person, kind of like the advice I just kind of gave out, I'll work on conflict resolution. This is easy. I'll get married. It'll be simple. I thought I was good at conflict resolution, working with people. But when you're in a relationship, a romantic relationship, that dynamic, if you haven't had experience there in that committed relationship, it's a whole nother ballpark. For at least it was for me, my naivety and arrogance around it. And so through some of that extreme conflict in that first relationship, I was able to enter, I think, my relationship now with Antonia with eyes wide open, going, okay, I know some conflict that I may be unaware of is coming. I shouldn't be arrogant. I should be humble here. And that helped a lot for me.
Now I want to ask you, Antonia, like, what was your experience of like the romance stage, meeting Joel, and then the shift? And maybe you can remember the permanence when the power struggle began.
Well, I have a famously horrific memory, so I'm gonna like try to navigate through all of this. It's just impressions of things that may or may not have happened. But my first marriage didn't have any conflict at all. But we were like siblings. I mean, we were still incredibly good friends. And he's like one of, he's the kind of person that both of us just know that for the rest of our lives we'll have each other's back. But there was no real intimacy. There was no real passion, no spark. We were like siblings, really. So I didn't have any conflict in my first marriage to speak of. And so I think I came in with some arrogance too. You know what I mean? It was like, I've got this down. And I don't think I was ready for the kinds of fights we were going to have and the kinds of conflict we were going to have. Like one of the things I wasn't expecting is that there'd be a sense of competition. Like that I did. And of course the power struggle kind of makes sense, right? You're competing and vying for who's going to have dominance in any specific battle, whether it's a decision or how you're going to live your life or who's right in the situation and who's wrong.
And I love competition. So it just triggers me. I'm like, oh yeah, we're competing. Let's go.
Yeah. And competing about things that like are almost impossible to compete around. And so I wasn't expecting a competitive frame. And so most of the fights were just I was just confused by a lot of it. And in your vernacular, I think I realized recently that I'm what you would call a chameleon, Bruce, but I think it's fearful avoidant attachment, which you mentioned in other materials that you've created is like fawning, which is when you are looking for that connection, it's this idea that you have to serve the other person, and it's really a manipulative act. You know, it's like I'm going to serve you and get all your needs met and make it so that we don't have to fight and you're never angry. But then also I'm just going to assume that you know what I want. And then when you don't meet it, I'm going to feel horrifically betrayed. So I think a lot of the conflict that we experienced was it was around, I think, naivety for me too, but also just a lot of confusion. And I don't know if relationships are I suspect I see relationships a little differently than other people do. My observation has been that coupling up and partnership for a lot of people are something they sort of set in their life It's like, I've got my career, I've got my relationship, I've got my, and like all these little things that people set up. It feels a little arranged. And in some ways, I think that like there's a superiority in seeing it that way sometimes, because for me, relationship and partnership and coupledom is like, it's 100%. I call it soul spelunking. It's about getting as far inside of me and the other person in intimacy as humanly possible. And so the challenge with that is, we keep things shallow with, strangers or relative strangers, because the more shallow we are, the more friendly we can be at each other, because there's like no conflict, right? Like if you don't speak another person's language and you're just like looking at each other, smiling from across the room, you don't have any malice towards this person. You're just going to smile at each other. You can't even talk. And so you're just going to send friendly signals and be like, we're cool here, but there's like zero chance of intimacy because you can't share any thoughts. But the further you go down in intimacy, the more likely you're going to run into all these landmines of like, no, I see the world profoundly differently than you do. And I have very different values, or I have a very different way of seeing things. And so every time we hit like another level of intimacy, there was like all of these bombs waiting for us to go off. And I don't know if I'd ever been able to be in a relationship where I could go as far as I wanted to. And so Joel was like the first relationship where I was like, we can go as far down as we want to. But there was just a series of landmines waiting for us when we did. And so I think I don't remember when we started quote unquote fighting and getting into that power struggle. I just remember the moment when I realized that I was getting the relationship that I had always dreamed of having. I was finally getting the intimacy piece that I wanted. But it seemed like that just meant, and it made sense to me that it would be filled with all of these, bombs and all these like, oh, that's how you feel? Okay, I guess we're going to have to hammer that out. And so I do remember that. I remember thinking like, I've always wanted to go this deep. And then at the same time, I remember thinking, but why? Because it's so painful.
But conflict is the doorway to intimacy, as you're so beautifully illustrating. I mean, without conflict, there is no intimacy, because nothing deep ever gets spoken about. And if you want to go deep, you're going to rub against each other's wounds, each other's raw spots, each other's pasts, in order to get that depth. And it was John Gottman who said the number one predictor of divorce is couples that don't fight.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And so when it came to all of that, I think, and I mean, I love the idea, and it's very nice that you're celebrating that we're in the mature love phase, but sometimes I feel like we're still in a power struggle. And I don't know if that is something that happens at mature love. Like you still have these moments, maybe as yet unexplored territory where the two of you haven't been together in this part of the map. And so all of a sudden the power struggle happens for this amount of territory or whatever, if that metaphor makes sense. So it doesn't feel like we're completely in mature love all the time. We still fight. We still have our problems and, these moments of dominance and supremacy.
Is that what you're saying though? Mature love is no fighting, lack of
That's
challenge?
Not what I'm saying. No. What I'm saying is in the mature love stage, conflict doesn't hurt in the same way it does in the power struggle stage. You're not out to hurt each other because you're fighting for power. You may be going deeper and deeper, and because you guys are in a growth relationship and your fundamental purpose is to grow yourselves and each other, you're always going to be excavating new parts of yourself, which means there's always going to be more conflict. But it's not conflict that's hurtful. It's hurtful conflict that's hurtful. And there's this distinction. The power struggle stage, couples often hurt each other as they're fighting with knives. In the mature love stage, you've learned skills. So conflict is still there and you're still having conflict, but you're no longer throwing a metaphorical punch at your partner to try and hurt them, to get them to back down. You're resolving it. You're talking about it. You're sitting discussing it. Maybe the discussions take half an hour because, there's deep stuff, but you're getting through it and then growing and building upon that. I think that's the distinction. So conflict doesn't upset the apple cart. It doesn't kind of stop the music and sabotage connection in the way that it does in the power struggle stage. In the mature love stage, you're far more of a team. And because you know each other so well, you know that, okay, this too shall pass. We've been through so many conflicts in the past. I'm not afraid that this conflict is going to destroy us because we're still together and we've got this foundation of commitment, this foundation of stability, this history of resolving past conflict and getting through it. And I think that's the difference.
What is your sense of the cost So there's this idea you have to give up to go up that I've always heard. And when you're in a position of leadership, as an example, there's a lot of things you have to sacrifice. A lot of people don't realize in positions of leaders often are sacrificing privileges and benefits in order to be able to be in that leadership position. Maybe privacy, freedom, the ability to just do what they want when they want. Like they have a responsibility. They've lost the ability. There's a cost to leadership. And so it kind of sounds like this mature love stage is a place a couple might want to get to because they can contribute. They're almost as a couple entering into a place of leadership contribution in the world. But my guess is there's a cost. As a couple, what do you give up? What is the sacrifice a couple makes in order to be in this type of place from your perspective, Bruce?
Sure. I think it's going to be personal for every couple, but I know what's probably almost universal is some form of freedom. Because when you're single, you're the agentic person in your life. You're the person who's deciding what happens. When you're a team, and in the mature love stage, you truly become a team, you have to consider both people and possibly your children. And it's a lot, it takes a lot more negotiation to make a choice, because you've got to find a choice that's great for you, that's great for your partner, that's great for the family, that's great for the relationship. But I think if I look at my own life, the things that I've given up in order to be married to my wife and have the life that we have together are not things I deeply yearn for and miss. There were often things about my personality that probably I needed to give up. So for example, I'm an Enneagram 7 ENTP, and before I met my wife, I was just traveling around the world in a different country every month, riding on my motorcycle around the world. And I've always been a nomad and a traveler. And I've lived in 6 different countries full time for many, many years in the countries, and visited 40 or 50 countries now. And I loved this traveling. And my fear was that if I committed and I settled down to one place, that I would get itchy feet and I would be completely unhappy. And in the beginning, I got itchy feet and I was unhappy. But as I sat with that discomfort, I learned that, oh, hold on, there are a whole bunch of benefits to staying in one place. And one of the reasons we had to stay in one place is that my wife had 2 teenage kids and they were at school and we couldn't just pick up and go. I realized, oh, hold on, when I'm in one place, I can build community. When I'm in one place, I can actually focus for extended periods of time and build a business and help more people in their relationships. And there were a whole lot of benefits that came from being in one place that I never had experienced before. And now, there's a middle ground that the kids are now older. So we travel together. She travels with me a lot. And then we'll stop and we'll spend 2 or 3 months in one place that's not home. And we'll put roots down because she likes roots. And we'll spend 3 months there and run the business from that place, and then pick up and move to the next place for a couple of months. And until COVID hit, we spent 2 years doing that around the world, where I got to have my need for novelty met, and she got to have her need for stability and security met. And both of us together came up with this great idea of traveling the world 3 months at a time, kind of thing, like in one place for 3 months at a time. And it really worked out for us. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of surrendering your own personal desires and needs, is that once you enter the mature love stage, the relationship ends up often bringing a greater vision or a greater gift that the two of you, it gives birth to something that's bigger than both of you, that you could never have dreamed of before, like Personality Hacker, for example, for you guys, that is almost better than what you had in mind when you were single. Like I do this exercise with my clients called collaborative problem solving, where I help them get onto the same page and come up with an idea that's collaborative. And almost always, when they start the process, they're stuck on their initial idea, the thing that they want to do. Like, for example, a couple that I worked with, he wanted to go on vacation to one place. She wanted to go on vacation to another place, and they were both stuck. They were clinging to their ideas, to their identity, to the choice that they had made, to what they wanted, and it was all me, 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 me. And of course, they couldn't meet halfway. I advised them to not compromise at all, and instead, we started having a look at what was motivating their desire to go to these different places. And we started to collaborate on a way for both of them to get their values met, to get their motivations met, even if they never got their initial ideas the way they'd hoped it turned out. And they came up with an idea for this vacation that was better than either of them initially had come up with, because they'd collaborated on it. But here's the thing. They collaborated on it with the intention of making certain that their partner won. So neither of them was going me, me, me. Both of them were going we. And of course, they had to feel like they had won too, but their primary focus at the same time in unison was making sure that the other person came up with an idea that was way better than they initially had, and that would serve both people in the relationship. And I think in that way, relationships can help give birth to some just spectacular visions for life and lifestyles and creative, unique ways of living that just you would never have dreamed of when you were single. That's certainly been the way for me.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
Yeah, it sounds like a really healthy, mature relationship. The cost is actually bits of your ego. It's like the part of me that really feels like I'm the center of the universe. I'm going to have to bump that out a little bit to include this other person. like we're going to have to be the center of the universe now, not just me. And I think there's something to be said for, that's a cost. There's a lot of benefits that come in partnership, but I also think that, if a person chooses not to be in partnership, like I kind of get it, right? Like that person is choosing to go towards freedom. I do think that there are some benefits, kind of like now that I've had a child, I understand that there are things about raising a kid that are basically personal development projects that I couldn't have found anywhere else. And I would say the same thing happens in a really intimate partnership, is that there are opportunities for growth and development in this partnership that I don't know if I could replicate in any other circumstance or situation. But of course, if you choose not to be in partnership, you're also going to have personal growth opportunities that live outside of partnerships that you can only have if you choose not to partner. So it's like, it's always a cost, right? You're always trading things out. But what I like about this idea of going to the mature love phase, and if we could talk a little bit about the vision of what that looks like, you've hinted that, it's kind of like a complex structure to be able to do good in the world. And I think making sort of a more of a sharper relief around that idea, I think would be nice. But what I hear you saying is that the power struggle is really us thrashing. It's like thrashing to try to figure out how we're going to do this dance with this other person. And
exactly.
Yeah, and like what's the choreography here, and who gets to lead, and who gets to make the final call. And I think you said, and I think I've observed this before, Bruce, that some people never leave it. Like they're there for like 50 years.
It's like a Cold War.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, the Cold War.
Yeah, and I know you can get used to anything, but what's a moment in people's lives, Bruce, when they go, okay, I think I'm done with this? Like what really is the trigger for people to bridge out of the power struggle and into mature love? Is it just like a death by 1,000 cuts and you're like at 998 and you're like, I think I'm going to have to fix this, otherwise we're gone or we're done? Or is it like a moment of appreciation, or like how does somebody take the next step into mature love if they've been in the power struggle for maybe a really long time?
Okay. Well, firstly, I don't think it's not a day and night transition that just happens overnight. And I don't think it's a choice. I think ending conflict or resolving conflict can be a choice, but entering the mature love stage is something that emerges. And it emerges as the result of the two of you working together to meet each other's needs, resolving and healing old childhood wounds. And for some of us, it happens by chance. For some of us, we just have some conversations, or we get to rock bottom and we finally go, you know what? I love you enough that I don't want to leave you. Let's talk about it and let's figure this out. For some of us, it might be, you know what, let's go and get some help because we don't know what the hell's going on, but I know I love you and I don't want this relationship to end. We need somebody else to help. And for others, you might just figure it out on your own. But for the majority of people, I think, or certainly the people that I talk to, and granted, I am a couples coach, so I do talk to exclusively couples that are generally struggling, or single people who want to learn how to not make the same mistakes again in their future relationships. I don't usually get to talk to the happy couples because they won't come and talk to me because they have no need to. But in my experience, it's hard to figure this stuff out on your own, because for many of us, we don't make the connection to our past and how our childhood wounds are influencing our reactions right now, which are clashing with our partner. So, for example, somebody who's afraid of abandonment will often attract somebody who, likes to disappear during conflicts and abandon them. And so often we'll attract the person who's most qualified to trigger us. And until we can see what's actually going on from an emotional perspective, from an attachment perspective, from a survival perspective, it just doesn't make sense. It can often feel like our partner's just crazy. And I think this is why so many of us just get stuck in the power struggle stage, feeling powerless to do anything about it. And we're like, well, I love you and I don't want to leave you, so I guess I'm just going to make do. But then we stay with this feeling of like, something's missing. I'm not satisfied. And for others of us, we'll just go, I'm out of here. I'm not willing to live in a relationship where I'm not satisfied. So I think there are a far fewer percentage of people in the mature love stage than in the power struggle stage, because very few people really make it there. But what it looks like, it feels, it's peaceful, it's calm, it's safe. So the relationship is stable. The relationship is not under threat anymore. And we were talking in one of the other conversations we were having about when we come into a relationship, it's like we give birth to this third entity. And the way I think of it is like it's a fire. Our relationship is a bonfire that we have to keep stoking. And if you don't stoke the fire regularly, it burns out and it disappears. And I think if you keep stoking the fire, you feel safe. The fire provides warmth. It provides protection. And here's an interesting thing is there's some research that shows that couples in the mature love stage live longer, up to 10 years longer. They earn 20 to 30% more money. They report lower levels of, high levels of happiness and lower incidences of ill health. And the big reason for this is the lack of cortisol. So cortisol drops when you feel safe and you do everything better. Or said another way, you don't do anything well when cortisol is in your bloodstream. Cortisol basically activates the amygdala and you're limited very often to your fight or flight or freeze or fawn reactions. And so we do everything better when we feel safe. And so the hallmark of the mature love stage, I think, is this felt sense of safety. And what emerges naturally out of that is commonly emerges is that the couple find themselves through their partnership discovering something like a project that they work on together. Nelson Mandela and Graça Machel are one of my favorite examples of this. Transforming South Africa was something they worked on together. When I think of mature love couples, I think of Richard Branson and his wife. And while they may not have a couple together, a project together, I know she supports him massively. In fact, here's a really interesting story I want to share with you. I can't remember if I've shared it with you before, but so I live in the Dominican Republic, and I live in this little kite surfing town called Cabarete. And I met a woman by the name of Jean here once, and she's the CEO of Virgin Unite, Richard Branson's charity. And she was telling me the story of when Richard Branson was on Necker Island with a group that he called together called the Elders. And the Elders were a group of extraordinary people. And the intention of bringing this group together was to create a kind of global group of elders, just like a tribe has a group of elders that the tribe calls upon for wisdom whenever they need to make an important decision. Richard Branson and Peter Gabriel were sitting down one day and said, the world doesn't have this group of elders. What if we got together and we used our influence to get together a group of elders for the world that would influence wayward leaders? So let's say, there was a wayward leader who was, a dictator and doing really, bad shit in his country. Nelson Mandela would pick up the phone and say, yo, dude, it's Nelson. Cut that shit out. And just because Nelson Mandela called them, they'd cut that shit out, basically. And so they had this extraordinary criteria, and they narrowed down, I think, 200 odd people to 7, which included Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Kofi Annan, Jimmy Carter. There were a couple of women too. I've just gone blank. You can Google it, the Elders. Anyway, they got this group of 7 people together on Necker Island for a week to discuss how the elders would function and what it would look like. And while they were there, they decided to see if they could figure out what they all had in common. I think it was Branson who suggested, wow, we've got 7 of the world's most accomplished leaders in one place. I wonder what we all have in common. Let's, for this week while we're here, have conversations and see if we can figure out what we all have in common. At the end of the week, they got together and they kind of shared notes on what they thought they all had in common. And there was only one thing that they could come up with that they all had in common: a powerful relationship with a supportive partner. The world's greatest leaders agreed that it was their relationship that gave them the courage, or that supported them, gave them the ability to take the risks that they had taken as leaders, knowing that if everything went to hell and everything fell apart, they had somebody who loved them, whose arms they could fall into for support and comfort, and that everything would be okay because their partner was there supporting them. And I think that's the picture of mature love that I think of. We evolve to our greatest self when we feel safe. And there's nothing like having a partner who's supportive. Not that their entire life is about supporting you. That's not what I'm suggesting. But knowing you have a supportive relationship to fall back on, to give you the courage to go out there and take risks in following your passions, your dreams, whatever it is you want to do in life. And here's another little piece of interesting information, and I'll shut up and give you guys a chance to say something, because I'm getting on a roll here, is that research shows that individuals in securely attached relationships in the mature love stage act more autonomously than they did when they were single. So they're almost like they're more agentic than when they were single. Why? I think because they feel safe. Being single, there's nothing wrong with being single. I loved being single. It was a whole lot of fun. And I think there's a level of safety that you can't achieve being single that can only be achieved in partnership. And it doesn't have to necessarily be romantic partnership, but in some kind of partnership, because when you are connected to other people in a tribe or in a romantic relationship, inherently you've got people who've got your back, and that lowers cortisol. And I think with less cortisol in our bloodstream, we feel more invincible. Like, let me go give that a try. And I'll share one example of this that directly involves you, Antonia. You were involved in setting up a TEDx event in Las Vegas that you invited me to speak at, or that I was invited to speak at. And I remember I got this call I can't remember if it was from you or from Alex, saying, hey, Bruce, we want you to come and speak at this TEDx event. And I was terrified. And I remember at one point I pulled out of the event, said, guys, I can't do this. Like, I'm not up for this. And because of my connections with the group, you guys actually stood for me, and you were like, Bruce, you've got this. You're going to be amazing. You're going to rock this thing. We believe in you. You cannot pull out of this. You have to do this. You're going to rock it. And it was through your guys' belief and support in me that I eventually went, okay, I'll do it. And I flew to Vegas and gave this TED talk, and it's had over 3 million views now. And it's one of the greatest talks I've ever given in my entire life. And I don't think I would have done that without your support. And so for me, that's a great example in my personal life of how being in relationship, not necessarily a romantic one, but in relationship, gave me the courage to do bigger things with my life. And so what I'm indirectly trying to say here is that relationship is a more complex structure than singledom is. Doesn't mean it's better. It's just more complex. Like a motorcycle is more complex than a bicycle. I'm a dirt biker, so hey, I had to use the motorcycle example. So yeah, I'm going to stop there and put a pause button in there for now.
Yeah. Well, no, I basically everything. I had about 5 different ideas come up for me as you were talking.
It's like there's another ENTP that's rivaling Antonia. This is great. I'm just sitting back like, yeah.
Joel's used to be.
Joel.
No.
This is fantastic.
Joel's like, now there's 2 of them. So the things that were coming up for me is they were actually making me think of other models. We've talked about Dave Logan's tribal leadership on the podcast before, and you're familiar with that model, right, Bruce? Mm-hmm. Dave's, yeah, okay. It makes me think of going from level 3, which is, I'm awesome, everybody else sucks, to we're awesome. Right? Like it's this moment when it's not really about you fighting for whatever it is you want out of life or whatever's going on for you. It's this moment when you realize that you're part of a team. Like this is you and me against the world, right? And the moment that clicks in, it kind of sounds like that's the moment of the mature relationship where you go, wait, why are we fighting with each other? We should be or against each other. We should be fighting with each other against everything else that is an obstacle in my world. And the other thing it made me think of is looking at it through the lens of Enneagram instincts, the social, sexual, and self-preservation. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about the lowering of cortisol. When you feel safety in numbers as a social, you're like the team, like the whole team is on my side. I think I'm going to be okay. I can rest into it. And then self-preservation, people are like, I always want to be ready. Like I want to be ready for anything the world throws at me. And if I'm ready, if I'm in a good space, if I'm physically healthy and I know where all the exits are, then I'm prepared in case, shit hits the fan. But I think on a relationship level, that's where the sexual instinct comes in, that one-to-one bonding, which is like I might not be able to be ready for everything in life, and I might not be able to have an entire tribe have my back, but I can have you and me. If we've got each other, we can get through anything. And and these are all different instincts or strategies for getting through life and lowering stress and all that stuff. And I think that there is something special in that one-to-one dynamic. There is I might not be able to rely on 10 people, but I can rely on that one person. And you and I, Bruce, we're both sexual subtypes. You said you were a sexual 7 and I'm a sexual 3. So that really resonates with me, that idea of team, this person has got my back. But and we were talking a little bit, and I want to go on a little bit of a tangent. Just to state my curiosity for how you're looking at it, Bruce, too, and Joel as well. There's this idea that good relationships should be easy, and you're basically arguing against that, going a good relationship isn't going to be easy, but it's going to move forward. It's going to have fights and a power struggle, and you're going to have to navigate through all that to exit on the other side into mature love. But then there's this other idea of if a relationship is too hard, if you're fighting all the time, then, why are you, the relationship shouldn't be that hard either. So right. if a person is trying to self-diagnose and show some discretion here around, is this the thing I should be fighting for, or is this something I should be exiting because it's not good for either of us? It's not healthy for either of us.
That's a good question, yeah.
Yeah, when you're in a power struggle, how do you tell the difference between those two things?
All relationships go through a time where it's difficult. It's not that all relationships have to be difficult. Or that relationships are difficult. It's that they go through a phase called the power struggle stage where it's always difficult. I mean, the power struggle stage by definition is challenging. It's not fun always, and it's difficult. I mean, it'll have moments of fun in it, but it's difficult. And I think when you get stuck and you're fighting all the time and you're thinking to yourself, this is too hard, man. This, it shouldn't be this hard. You're right. It shouldn't be this hard. So you have 2 choices: get help or leave. And I think the natural instinct is to leave rather than get help. And only you can decide whether to leave or get help. So you have to ask yourself the question, does this relationship have enough goodness in it? Can I see the other side of this where we're compatible enough we have so much good that it's worth getting the help to get through the power struggle stage? Or, is this just this, it's not worth it for me to put the effort in to get the help because this relationship doesn't have enough in it for me. And that's when you leave. Now, I think a mistake a lot of people make is they leave before getting help, because in my last 10 and a half years of helping couples through conflict, I've got hundreds of stories of, one couple comes, one partner comes to me convinced the other person is just a jerk and an asshole and out to get them. The other person comes to me convinced the other person just blaming all the time and nothing they ever do is good enough. And they're both convinced that it's the other one's fault and that they're never going to change and the relationship is hopeless. And almost always within 2 hours with them, we'll discover a massive, critical, relationship game-changing misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding almost always shines a light on the other person's positive intention, the need that they were trying to meet in an ineffective way that made them look like a jerk. And when they get past that big misunderstanding, it's like the first domino that knocks so many of the other dominoes over. And within 2 hours, often I can get a couple from coming to me being in a place of, we're about to divorce, it's hopeless, we've tried everything, nothing works, to, hold on, maybe this can work. Hope enters again. And that's what we need to begin. And it's usually because they got somebody outside who could see what they couldn't see, because they're trained to see that kind of stuff. And because our initial instinct when we don't understand something is to just assume, well, it's the other person's fault. They must be the problem here, because I know I have good intentions, but clearly they don't have good intentions. So I think before you quit, before you decide, I'm out of here, this is too much, I can't do this anymore, don't quit before you've at least gotten some kind of help from a professional. And I really want to underline from a professional, because unfortunately in the world that I swim in, there are a lot of people who have PhDs behind their names, but don't have a clue what they're doing. And that's not necessarily their fault. It's because the developments in couples therapy are so new. The findings about what actually works are like 10 years old. And a lot of couples therapists were trained a long time before that and are using old, outdated models of individual therapy on couples that don't work, where you really need a new model that treats the relationship as a separate entity, that it has its own needs. Anyway, I could go on. I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole.
Well, let me give out a metaphor here. As you were talking, this came to my mind, a question someone might ask themselves. There's this metaphor of a thermostat, a heating thermostat in your house. And we usually, here in the United States, we use Fahrenheit degrees, so I'll use that. So usually in the middle of winter, you might set it anywhere between 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to keep it in that comfort range. So when it dips below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, it kicks on, it heats the house up, and then it shuts off when it gets above 72. So it always tries to keep it in that range. And I'm guessing every relationship has a thermostat also. A general setting, you might dip into a power struggle and have a dip where it gets cold in your relationship. You have hostility, and you may have spikes in passion, a weekend away. There's all this passion and romance and sexual dynamic and chemistry. But what's your set point? What's the set point of the relationship? And if that's always set at fighting, and that's the set point of the relationship, maybe that's a relationship that's toxic and hostile, and you're not going to be able to get through it. But if your set point is normally homeostasis, you're not always fighting at each other's throats, you dip into conflict, that set point might be a good gauge for you to determine that.
Absolutely. And what that reminds me of, Joel, as well, is one of our friends, Adilala, who's also a love coach. She has a great saying, don't break up unless you're in love. And what she's referring to by this is, you're not ready to break up unless you can see and love your partner for what's happening in the relationship. Until you've learned to love your partner's flaws, they're just triggering you, and your desire to leave is more a reflection on your unhealed wounds than it is on them. So I do this exercise with my clients when right in the beginning, where I get them to write down a list of their needs, their wants and their requirements. And their wants are like the cherry on the top. They're like, I want a partner, who has brunette hair and who likes, motorcycling like I do. They're totally optional. None of them are really important. They're like the most shallow layer of what we want, but it's useful to write them down. Then we compare that with our needs, and our needs are the things that we need to have met in order to feel fulfilled. And then we have requirements, which are our absolute deal breakers. And the way I describe when it's time to leave to my clients is you leave when your requirements are not being met, not when your needs are not being met, because needs can be met in multiple ways. And that's just a matter of working it out. But when you've got a fundamental requirement, like let's say, for example, you want a child and your partner's really clear they don't want a child. There's no way to have half a child and meet each other halfway on that.
Yeah.
Right? Because somebody's going to have to compromise. And if you're clear you never want a child and the other one's clear they definitely want a child, that is a requirement that's not being met. And you should leave that relationship. And you could see how you could leave in love. You could go, wow, I love you. And I'm really sad this is over. And it's over because we have different requirements. And good luck on your journey. I love you. Goodbye. It doesn't have to be screw you. I'm out of here. So that's what I wanted to add in there.
It's fascinating to think about requirements as actually being a layer deeper than needs.
Yeah.
It almost kind of sounds like, what are they? Deal breakers, basically. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, exactly. So like the requirements come at the very bottom. And then that dovetails into what you were saying that Annie Lala, and actually we've actually interviewed Annie for one of our programs for our, one of our empowered program for INFPs and INFJs. And Annie's like always a source of like ridiculously pithy statements that make you think. And yeah, like she's just got one right
I'm so
after
jealous.
I know. And that idea of like don't leave until you fall in love is really fascinating because, and especially tying into what I mentioned before, is like when do you know that the fight is something that you need to get through, and when is this just like a situation maybe that you need to walk away from. And if you haven't come to a full appreciation of your partner and understood them and accepted them as they are, and then gone, okay, well, maybe this is actual, true, legit incompatibility. This doesn't have to do with me feeling like you're brushing up against all of my bruises and all my raw, nerves and all that stuff. I'm not just like reacting all the time and constantly getting triggered. I'm actually in a space of thoughtfully considering what's going on here. And it's work that I don't think no amount of personal growth work is going to solve this one. Basically, that's what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is that when you get to a moment and you go, growth and development and becoming the best versions of ourselves will actually exacerbate the problem because it's a foundational underlying incompatibility. And in that case, that's sad. That's really sad. And also, not everybody's meant for everybody. And so I think that's a really interesting perspective to look at it from when you go, I think that this is unfortunately, this is just, it just can't work at its foundational level. And so this idea of like, this is coming up for me, by the way. I'm remembering a tweet I made. It was after, not a fight between Joel and I, but it was actually more like, there was something that was just this, I don't know, like it was a thistle under our saddle. Do you know what I mean? It was just something that was constantly frustrating and irritating. And I think, yeah, what?
Just keep going.
No, well, it's not. I'm not going to mention anything specific, but I just remember this moment when we shone a light on it instead of like not looking at it, which is what we had done, which is why it was a burr under our saddle for so long. We just finally went, okay, like what's going on here? And we looked at it, and it was. It was funny earlier. You said something, it might be a half-hour conversation. I'm like, half-hour conversation? That means that nothing was going on for us. Like anytime there's like a legit thing, we're talking like days of conversation oftentimes, and we finally addressed it, and it was hard and complicated and required all this compromise. And it was, and I wrote a tweet about how like hard relationships are. Like, it's so fucking hard, I'm dropping the F-bomb, but it's like, it's so hard sometimes in these relationships to like do them right. But it's like, it's a fight that's worth it. And somebody else, I mean, social media, so everybody always gets salty, but somebody else got salty about it and said a relationship shouldn't be hard. If it's hard, if it's like, if the relationship is hard, then that means that it's a sign that it's bad. And I think I understood where they were coming from in this sense that don't stay in perpetually toxic relationships. I think that's really where they took that piece in their mind, probably because they had to train themselves to not allow themselves to be in one bad relationship after another. But from my perspective, there's like this sweet spot of going, okay, I'm not saying stay in a toxic bad relationship, but also if you're doing it right, I think it's going to feel like it's hard. Like this is, like you said, it's a complex system. It's something where you're trying to negotiate two of the most complex structures in the universe, which are human beings. And so now you're putting these two things, and now you have to do complex coordination. And that means that there's going to be a lot of bumping up against each other and hitting the wrong button, and it's going to be hard. And you can either like look it in the face and do something about it, and that's going to feel even harder a lot of times because you're putting the work up front for later reward. Or you can keep kicking the can down the road and let it explode at whatever time it decides to explode. But either way, it's going to be hard. And I don't think that that's not necessarily a symbol of a bad relationship. And then there's this idea, though, don't stay in a toxic relationship. But what I'm hearing from you, actually, and I think that this might be sort of the number one takeaway I'm going to get from this podcast, which is that if you're in a bad situation, in a relationship or a partnership, and things just feel really like constant power struggle. I think that's such a great phrase to use to explain this. I think after a certain point, you got to ask yourself, like, how much of this is actually just me? And if I left and placed myself in another situation, it would all repeat because the patterns aren't in the relationship. The pattern is in me. And I'm going to carry this from thing to thing to thing. Any situation that allows this to be brought up in me is going to bring this up in me because I'm the point of origin. Versus I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and it's still not gelling. And that's something that has to be sort of like acknowledged. And and sometimes those are heartbreaking. But I think that's such a great just baseline principle. Like, is this problem going to travel with you, or is this problem created in the dynamic? And so if it's a problem created in the dynamic, can you still do something about it? And at the end of the day, if you can't, then you're done. And if you can, then and this is worth it to you, then it's worth getting through that struggle. It's worth getting to the other side when you go back to being a team.
I really do like that concept of being a team, of having a relationship that has complex coordination, that then is able to, instead of having to continually work on all the challenges in the relationship, can be facing outward to create something in the world. I think we did a podcast a long time ago, Antonia, maybe 5-6 years ago, I think it was called Enter the Power Couple. We're talking about how there potentially is room on the planet for leadership to emerge from couples. And it was a really interesting concept that we put out there. And I think that's, you would need couples basically in that mature love stage in order to be able to step into a framework of leadership and some way to give and contribute as a couple together in a project like that. So I love that idea. I love that concept. And of course, I'm doing that with the person I'm in love with and married to. I'm creating with you, and we're creating together. And I think we are greater than the sum of our parts. So these are great concepts, Bruce. I really appreciate you being on the show this week.
Pleasure.
Where can people find you online? What kind of work do you do? Just maybe quickly outline it for us. And then where can people find more about you?
I have a business called Love at First Fight with an F, not Love at First Sight, loveatfirstfight.com. And I specialize in helping couples get through the power struggle stage. So couples come to me when they're in conflict and they're dealing with issues of betrayal or trust or conflict or recurring conflict, or they just can't seem to get in the same page, or they're constantly fighting, or little fights about nothing seem to erupt into massive volcanic kind of shitstorms. That's the kind of work I help couples get through so that they can lay the foundations for a lifetime of love together, move into the mature love stage without hurting each other anymore. And I often work with singles too, people who've just come out of relationships and they've realized that, oh, hold on, the common denominator in my failed relationships is me. This was a big insight I had. And I'm ready to learn to find out how not to make the same mistake again. And I run online courses that are affordable. And we've helped now more than 4,000 couples turn their relationships around. So you can find me at loveatfirstfight.com. I have a lot of free material there. So go sign up for some of my free stuff and enjoy.
Yeah. And we can't recommend Bruce high enough, I guess. He's great.
Every time you talk about relationship stuff, you always make me cry, Bruce, which is a really good thing, actually.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Every time. I was like yesterday we were recording some material and there was at least twice when I teared up. So
Wow.
that's high praise for me because I'm cold to the center of my heart. So if you can make me cry, it's a big deal.
So you've been listening along with us. You're the fourth person in this conversation. You haven't had a microphone, but now's your turn to come over and make your voice heard. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, go ahead and share your comment, ask a question. We'd love to hear your personal story. You might have a story of your relationship going through a power struggle stage, how you and your partner got through it, or maybe you didn't get through it, and the lessons you learned. We'd love to hear from you. I think it would be beneficial for the community, for you to share what's going on in your life and your perspective.
Yeah, we super appreciate, Bruce, you being here as a guest host with us this week.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Couldn't be more grateful. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Leave a rating and review for us on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And remember, there's no advertising on the podcast because it's all subsidized through our business of Personality Hacker. So we create personal growth programs through the lens of personality psychology and types. If that's interesting to you and you'd like to invest in yourself and in us, head over to personalityhacker.com and look at our product catalog and see if there's one that's right for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
I'm Bruce Muzik.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.